Hi, Tara Salee, Hy-Vee dietitian, here to talk to you today about Carb Smart tips for navigating your Thanksgiving. This is a really fun time of year, filled with family, fun, festivities, but there can also be a lot of our family favorite dishes that are richer and sweeter than what we're used to consuming. And oftentimes, these are the ones we consume in larger portions. This can make it really difficult when we are trying to stick to some of our healthy lifestyle goals and also enjoy and have balance with the holidays. So today we're going to be talking through some tips I have for you that you could put into practice to help kind of manage the two. So for starters, you may be asking, why is it important to even watch carbohydrates in the first place? And the first and main reason would be if someone is diabetic. If you're diabetic or if you're pre-diabetic, carbohydrates are key. This is the most important nutrient for you to watch because carbohydrates are all broken down in our body into sugar, and this raises our blood sugar. So it's really important to first know what carbohydrates are and to also choose Carb Smart to help manage those blood sugars, because the goal when managing blood sugars is to not have high spikes and then really low drops like a mountain, but we would rather have slow gradual inclines and then slow declines, kind of like hills. This would be ideal when it comes to that blood sugar profile. So we're going to talk about what to pair for that. The other reason you may be concerned with carbohydrates could possibly be if you are eating a lower carb diet. There's a lot of trendy diets right now that really emphasize other food groups, things like protein and fat in terms of maybe keto, that would be putting that carbohydrate content of our calories much lower. And that would be another reason for wanting to watch the carbohydrates that you're choosing. So the first thing to understand is what foods do have carbohydrates. So of course, the first thing most people think of, and a little bit of a misconception, is sugar. Sugar is what you have to watch for when it comes to managing blood sugar. And that's part of it, but not all of it. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's carbohydrates, because all carbohydrates are broken down into sugar. Our sweets do have carbs though. So things like pie, cake, cookies, all of these do have sugar, and we do have to account for those. But so does rice, so does pasta, so do cereal and crackers, as well as our starchy vegetables, things like corn, peas, potatoes, sweet potatoes. Again, healthy foods for us. They're not off limits, but we do have to account for those, as well as all of our fruit. All fruit contains fructose, which is a carbohydrate, and when it's broken down in our body, our blood sugar raises. So a couple really simple things you could do right off the bat is every time you are sitting down to eat, always try to pair those carbohydrates with the protein. Protein is super effective at stabilizing your blood sugar. When we combine that carbohydrate and that protein, you're going to have that broken down in your body much slower, so you're going to have a very gradual rise. The other thing protein does is it will stabilize your blood sugar because it does take so long for your body to break that down. The second thing I'd encourage you to do is when it comes to your carbohydrates, really focus on the fiber. Fiber is an indigestible carbohydrate. So the more fiber we have in the carbs we choose, the more slowly our body will break that down, meaning we won't have those spikes, which is really important. So let's get right into it. My very first tip for you when it comes to choosing Carb Smart and navigating Thanksgiving is going to be to plan ahead. So when it comes to some of those social gatherings and family meals, it can be difficult to do this because we're only in control of so much. But the one thing you can do is prepare in advance. So one thing that I see a lot of my patients and customers will do is they'll think, okay, I know that big meal is coming, so I'm just not going to eat in anticipation of that, knowing I might overindulge a little bit, or maybe my portions won't be quite in check. This is one of the worst things that we can do. We do not want to skip meals heading into that holiday situation. So what I would encourage you to do is to have a smaller meal or a snack consisting mainly of protein and a high fiber food. This would be that power snack we're looking for, because if we don't have that, what will happen is our blood sugar could dip a little bit, and then our liver just dumps glycogen into our bloodstream, causing a spike. The second thing that happens when we skip meals is physiologically, once food is presented to us, it's really hard at that point because we're ravenous. So it's hard to choose wisely and use portion control. which is again not how we want to feel headed into, you know, a Thanksgiving meal. So plan ahead, have a snack that you can consume an appropriate portion of, something that's rich in protein and also has fiber. So for today, what I'm going to be preparing for you guys is the maple cinnamon trail mix, and that's what we have here. So the maple cinnamon trail mix is going to be a good choice because it combines those two things. Great source of protein and also a good source of fiber. It also, because of that maple and the cinnamon, it gives us that kind of rich fall flavor profile that'll be really yummy for the cooler weather. So the first thing, what you're going to need to make this recipe is you're going to need walnuts. You're going to need pepitas here. These are almonds, as well as popcorn kernels, baked apple chips, golden raisins here, maple syrup. This is 100% maple syrup, some olive oil, and then we have a little bit of apple pie spice, as well as just a little bit of butter. Okay, so the very first thing you're going to do to prepare this recipe is you'll need to toast your walnuts. Whenever you toast nuts, this is something that's really going to bring out the flavor. It also will make it a little bit crunchy for this trail mix. The thing I really like about using nuts, especially toasted nuts, in place of other things, is because it's a great carb smart choice. Whenever you're using nuts in place of maybe even, you know, a crouton in a salad or something like that, you're not adding any additional carbohydrates really. You're just adding some protein and some healthy fats, which is ideal. So what I've done here is I heated my heavy stock pot back here to medium high, and I went ahead and just toasted these walnuts right in the pan. So at medium high, I was stirring them continuously. So I went ahead and did that for us. I'm gonna go ahead and add these to our bowl here. The next thing that I did ahead for us is I put a couple tablespoons of our oil into the pan and heated it to medium-high heat. In addition, I added 2 tablespoons of maple syrup and a 1/3 cup of our popcorn kernels. I gave that a really good stir, and then I basically just shook it continuously until it wasn't really popping anymore. At that point, I took it off the heat, and so now we're ready to go here. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring this over, and it smells delicious. That maple syrup just makes it smell almost like kettle corn. It's really yummy. All right, so we have some popcorn in there. And then from there, we're going to add the other nuts we need. So we are going to do 1/2 cup of these pepitas. Pepitas are one of those superfoods. These are these little green. I love using these on all kinds of things. Like I'll put these in Greek yogurt. I'll put these on salads for a little bit of crunch. I'll even add them to my oatmeal. So they are a good source of protein, a great source of fiber. Rich in selenium and magnesium, and are also actually considered to be an immune boosting food. So a really good one to incorporate. The next one we're gonna do is our almonds. This is a heart healthy nut. We're gonna do 1/2 cup of those as well. These nuts are really high in monounsaturated fats. Monounsaturated fats are those fats that are really good for your heart. Also a good source of protein and fiber. So there we have those. Next up, we have these baked apple chips here. So we're using 1/4 cup of these. I really like these baked apple chips because whenever I'm purchasing something in a bag, I really like to check out that ingredient listing on the back and see what exactly is in the food I'm eating here. And the ingredients here say apples, period. There is nothing else in this product. So they have basically taken these apples, sliced them up, and baked them. And that is what we're left with, which I love. So there we go. We have our apples there. Next up, we have our raisins. So we're using 1/2 cup of these golden raisins. Raisins are a great source of fiber, as is any dried fruit. Kind of a little bit stuck in there. Loosen those up just a little bit. Get that full 1/2 cup. There we go. And then we will add our apple pie spice, which is going to give us that sweet, that flavor that we're looking for, but there's no sugar in here, so it's just basically those herbs. And for this one, for that apple pie spice, we are going to add here 1 teaspoon. All right. And then last but not least, I have a little bit of butter. This is half a tablespoon of butter. And I'm just going to give that a quick melt because we're just going to mix this right over the top. Okay, so all melty. All right, and then we're pouring that right over the top. And then just give this a good stir and your trail mix is ready to go. Again, the benefits of this is that the carbs in here are going to be whole grain, and they're also going to be a great source of fiber, and also we have a lot of great sources of protein. So this would be a much healthier snack than maybe grabbing some of the other things sitting around at the holiday like cookies and sweets. All right, so there we go with our maple cinnamon trail mix there. Okay, so now we're gonna switch gears out here and move on to our second tip for picking Carb Smart and navigating Thanksgiving, which is gonna be to make some healthy carb swaps. So again, a lot of those holiday dishes that we're used to eating can be really high in sugar, they can be really high in fat, they can be high in carb. So let's do what we can to try to decrease the sugar we use. Oftentimes, especially with baked goods that you're preparing, you can decrease the sugar in those recipes and you won't even miss it. So what I like to do is decrease the sugar that it calls for in most baked recipes by about 1/4 of a cup. And then what I do to compensate for that is I will increase the vanilla extract or even add a little bit of zest, which is kind of the peel, and I will just zest that, orange peel, lemon peel, things like that to pull out a little bit more flavor as well. The other thing you can do is you can use a sugar substitute. And so that's what we're going to be using today here in just a minute. This is called Swerve. And this is a sugar substitute that you can use in cooking and baking. So this in particular is made from sugar alcohol. There is there's 4 grams of carbohydrate in here, but no sugar. It's all made from that sugar alcohol. So a lot of times my patients will tell me that they don't really like the flavor or the after flavor of things like stevia or some other like non-calorie sweeteners. This one I do not taste that with. So I'd encourage you to give this a try if you're someone who is wanting to kind of cut down on those carbohydrates in some of your recipes. The other thing I would caution you with when it comes to this product in particular, as with any sugar alcohol, if you are someone who has some GI issues, please do know that this can exacerbate those. So if you're someone that does have some GI upset or things like that, just know that I would use this with a little bit of caution. If you're not in that boat, then there really should be no issue there. The other thing you can do to make a couple carbs, some of those carb swaps would be to replace regular flour with whole wheat flour. The benefit of doing this is anytime you can use a whole grain or a whole wheat product in place of a white flour or refined grain, you're going to increase that fiber, which we talked about back a few minutes ago. The more you can increase the fiber, the slower and the less impact it will have on your blood sugar, which is ideal. You can also swap out any kind of ice cream for frozen Greek yogurt. You could make swaps like using riced cauliflower in place of rice. These are other ways to lighten up those some of those tried and true recipes. And I will include a listing of some of these swaps on the handout that was attached to this video. So what we're going to be making now and using some of the swaps I've just kind of outlined for you is pumpkin muffins. So what we've started with here and what we'll need for this recipe is our whole wheat flour. You're going to need some sea salt. You're going to need some baking soda. Here we have some dark chocolate chips. Over here we have our seasonings here. So we are using cinnamon, some nutmeg, cloves, and ginger, some canned pumpkin, olive oil, 3 eggs, and we're going to use the Swerve product. So we'll start with just mixing our dry ingredients here. So we have our flour. We went ahead and put that in the bowl. So now we're going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt. We're going to add our baking soda. So this is a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. Next up, we have our 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, a 1/4 teaspoon of ginger, and 1/8 teaspoon of cloves. That's all combined in here, so I'm going to add all of that together. I'm going to go ahead, I like to create as little extra work as possible, so I'm going to use one bowl today and not a separate bowl for my wet. So I'm giving this a stir to get all those dry ingredients mixed up. And now I'm going to make a well right in the middle for my wet ingredients here. All right, so for the rest of those, the next thing we're going to add here is our oil. So this is 2 tablespoons of olive oil here. This is a heart-healthy oil. We're going to use 3 eggs. Those are whole eggs. And now we're using canned pumpkin. So this, again, when we're looking at that ingredient label, it is just pumpkin puree. There's nothing else in there. Now, one thing to note is we only need 1 cup of pumpkin, but a lot of times these cans of pumpkin are a little bit more than that. So make sure you measure that out. Canned pumpkin adds so much flavor. And the other thing I love about it is it's so high in fiber. Okay. So you're going to stir all of this up. These also freeze really well, so again, it's one of those things that you can make ahead of time and pull out as a healthy snack. Now, something else, I'm not adding this today, but something else you could do if you're making this recipe is you could add some of those the nuts. So if you wanted to toast some walnuts or some slivered almonds and add that in, you can absolutely do that as well. It would add to that protein content. You'd also be getting some of those healthy fats, which we know that it's not always, the amount of fat we eat, but the type of fat. So those healthy fats are really ones we want to encourage and eat more of. Okay, and then last but not least here, we have the dark chocolate. So what I chose to use here were these Ghirardelli baking chips. These are 72% cocoa. So in doing that, the higher that cocoa content, the lower the sugar content. So similar to the other swaps we've made here today, doing the dark chocolate in place of a milk chocolate is going to be a much better option because you don't have as much sugar in there. So we're using just a 1/4 cup of those. We don't need much. We just wanted a little extra flavor in there. And honestly, if this is something you could probably leave out altogether and you wouldn't miss it. Okay, and then actually I almost forgot this. So we should have added this back when we were doing our dry ingredients. So thankfully, I'm gonna add it now. Otherwise we'd be missing a little sweetness with this. For the Swerve, we're using 1/2 cup. So I'm gonna borrow this one here of the Swerve. The nice thing about this is that you can sub it equal parts. So if your recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of sugar, you could use the 1/4 cup of Swerve. Again, you would normally want to add this if you're doing your dry ingredients, but we're just improvising here, giving this another good stir. They also make Swerve in brown sugar. It browns just like sugar as well when you bake with it, so that makes it nice as well. Okay, and then for baking, what I've done back here is I went ahead and I got the pans. I sprayed those, and we're gonna fill these. We'll pop them in the oven at 325 for about 30 minutes, and then these will be good to go. If you're unsure, because I know every oven bakes a little bit differently, if you're unsure as to whether or not they're done, I would just use the toothpick method and make sure that they come out clean. You can see this dough, this batter is really thick, which is how it's supposed to be. This is a denser muffin for 2 reasons. The whole wheat flour is dense, as well as that pumpkin in there. and we really don't have a lot of oil, so it's not going to really be a very thin batter. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get those in the oven, and then we will move on to our third, fourth, and fifth tip. Tip number 3 is to satisfy your sweet tooth. So one thing that is really important is to not completely try to avoid or eliminate altogether, especially around the holidays. But you can choose wisely when it comes to those indulgences. So what we're going to make next is our pumpkin yogurt fluff. And for this, we are going to be able to indulge in that, pumpkin-y type of flavor, something a little bit of sweet, but also it's going to have some of those healthy carb choices we've talked about. So the first thing we're going to do here is we need, I can grab this, a can of pumpkin. So for this, you're going to use the whole can. We're going to use a container of Greek yogurt. Alright, so we have our pumpkin here. We're going to use a container of Greek yogurt. This Greek yogurt, it's the vanilla flavor. But this is the Oikos Pro, so we're getting 20 grams of protein in this per container, which is just really fantastic to think about, especially when we're making this pumpkin fluff dip, which is going to just be packed with protein now to help provide that stability for our blood sugar. The other thing about this is when it comes to Greek yogurt, it's strained an additional time, so it's a lower carbohydrate content compared to with a traditional yogurt. We're going to use 1 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. So for the pumpkin pie spice, it adds that sweetness, but there's no sugar in here, okay? So it's gonna provide that sweetness without the sugar. We're gonna use a container of the fat-free, sugar-free Jell-O pudding mix, which again is gonna provide kind of that sweetness, but no carbohydrates there. And when it comes to this, once you get all of those ingredients in there, you're going to mix this until it starts to thicken. You'll feel it kind of thicken up just a little bit. This dip, I like to use this fluff as a dip, so I will use this as kind of like a fruit dip to put with sliced pears or apples for the kids. Or you can turn it into kind of more of a sweet treat, if you will. So once you have that mix, the next thing you're gonna do is add the whipped topping. So this is light whipped topping, and you're gonna fold this in. So here we go. And then to fold it in, you don't wanna over stir this. So you're basically just kind of like folding it up into the pumpkin mixture. So it's going to be really light and fluffy. So again, this is such an easy kind of dip or fluff to make. All we really needed was our pudding mix, our yogurt, our whipped topping, and then again that pumpkin and the pumpkin pie spice. Okay, so once you have that kind of folded in there, you are ready to either chill this and save it for later, or something that I sometimes like to do is go ahead and portion it into little dishes. The other thing that if you're wanting to kind of turn it into something a little bit sweeter, you could put some ginger snaps with it. So that's what I've done here. I've just used a couple of these ginger snaps, or you could crush those on top if you're making it into a dip, and then again slice your apples or whatever you'd like to go with it. Super simple, kind of satisfies that sweet tooth, but a healthier way to do so. All right, so tip number 4 is to make time for activity. So I really would encourage you to carve in time to go on a hike, go on family walks, or make time for your own exercise routine. This is so important, especially with the holidays. It can be one of the first things to get pushed to the side, but it's one of those things that will add a little bit of a buffer for you. Not only that, we've been talking about blood sugar off and on over the last 20 minutes or so, and doing activity is another way to decrease that blood sugar and provide stability there. So I'd really encourage you to maybe even create a new family tradition. Maybe after Thanksgiving meal, get everyone up. If the weather's nice, and everyone can go on a walk together. And tip number 5, our last tip, is to be mindful and moderate. So balance is key here. You know, when it comes to your meal, you know, I would encourage you to do a couple things. For one, take inventory. What's available? You know, is your aunt's your favorite sweet potato dish there that you only get once a year? Well, you know you're gonna want that. So maybe you could cut back in another area with something that's not as important, like the stuffing. Or is there a dessert there that you know you're going to want to try? So maybe you can skip, you know, the cookies or something. Create a little bit of balance with making room on your plate for the things that are important and maybe skipping over or cutting down the portion on the things that aren't. And last but not least, be careful of grazing. This is one thing that can make it very difficult to stay on track when you're walking through a room and kind of munching on things throughout the day. So be very mindful and intentional about what you're going to fuel your body with. Get a plate, eat from your plate. Try not to take bites and nibbles throughout the day because those calories can really add up, and sometimes calories and carbohydrates from grazing can be more than the actual meal itself. So be careful with that as well. Last but not least, I also wanted to mention we have a really great opportunity coming up at Hy-Vee. If you are interested in getting your hemoglobin A1C screening done, we are offering those free in November. And you can reach out to me directly to get that scheduled if you're interested in that. Your A1C screening is going to give you a lot of information if you're concerned with your blood sugar. This is a 3-month average of your blood sugar. And it only takes about 10 minutes in the office, and you'll have the results when you leave. These appointments are first come, first serve, so you can definitely reach out if you're interested in that. As always, Hy-Vee dietitians are here to make your lives easier, healthier, and happier. I hope you have a great week.